The frontier carves its own laws into the land and the soul. Mercy is the rarest currency, and spending it can cost a person everything they have. The Arizona sun was a merciless hammer, beating the red earth into a cracked, scorched pan. Abigail Thorne, known to the few who knew her as Abby, shifted the weight of the grain sack on her shoulder. Her soul, like her calloused hands, had grown tough from the relentless toil. Her small ranch, a lonely outpost, wedged between unforgiving rock formations, was both her sanctuary and her prison. The silence of the territory was vast, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the sagebrush. Returning from the creek, her eyes caught a dark shape against the orange cliffs at the canyon's base, a stark stain on the landscape. It was unnaturally still, a detail that sent a cold prickle down her spine. At first she dismissed it as a dead coyote, a common sight in these harsh lands. But a gut feeling, honed by years of solitude, pulled her closer. As the shape resolved, a chill seized her despite the blistering heat. It was a man, lying face down in the dust. His buckskin clothing was dark with blood, and the black fletching of an arrow protruded from his shoulder. An Apache. The word echoed in her mind with all the weight of a death sentence. Her father's gravelly voice, a ghost from her past, spoke in her memory. "You see one alone, Abby. You run. The others are shadows in the rocks, waiting." The man was bait, a trap laid for a fool. Logic screamed at her to turn back, to saddle her horse and ride until the sun set twice. But as she watched, she saw the faint, almost imperceptible rise and fall of his chest. He was breathing, a flicker of life in a world so eager to claim it. This was not the posture of a warrior in ambush. This was a man broken, left to the mercy of the vultures and the sun. Her feet, against all reason, moved forward. Each step was a debate between the survival instincts her father had taught her and a deeper, more stubborn compassion that was entirely her own. She could not leave him. She would not. Kneeling beside him, she felt the heat radiating from the ground through the thin soles of her boots. The scent of blood and dust filled the air. With gentle hands, she turned him over. His face was young, etched with pain even in unconsciousness. His lips were cracked and dry. She uncorked her canteen, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. The water was more precious than gold, but she let a small stream trickle onto his lips. He stirred, a low groan escaping his throat. In that moment, Abby Thorne sealed her fate. She had chosen a path, and she knew, with terrifying certainty, there was no turning back. Dragging the unconscious Apache back to her cabin was a trial of fire and muscle. The man was not heavy, but dead weight is a cruel burden. The sharp stones of the canyon floor tore at her boots and the hem of her simple cotton dress. The sun beat down, and sweat stung her eyes, blurring the familiar path to her homestead. With every agonizing step she cursed her own foolish heart. Why could she not be hard like this land? Why did a stranger's life suddenly matter more than her own? But she did not stop. She pushed onward, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her determination a grim mask on her face. She finally reached the relative cool of her small, sturdy cabin. The door groaned in protest as she pushed it open with her shoulder. The root cellar, dug deep into the earth, was her only option. It was dark, cool, and hidden. With the last of her strength, she lowered him into the darkness, laying him carefully on a bed of old quilts. The heavy trapdoor closed with a hollow thud, a sound that seemed to echo the closing of a door on her old life. She collapsed into a chair, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The silence of the cabin felt different now, filled with a dangerous secret. Later, by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, she tended to his wound. The arrowhead was lodged deep in the flesh of his shoulder. Her hands, though steady, shook slightly as she prepared to remove it. She had set broken bones and stitched gashes on livestock, but this was different. This was a man's life under her knife. As she worked, his eyes fluttered open. They were dark and deep, pools of midnight in the lamplight, and for a moment they focused on her face with stunning clarity. He was trying to speak, his dry lips forming words she could not hear. He managed a single raspy whisper before unconsciousness claimed him again. "Kane, my brother." The name struck Abby like a physical blow. Silas Kane, the ruthless owner of the Red Creek Saloon, a man who ruled the nearby town with an iron fist and a deep, festering hatred for all native peoples. A man who believed this land was his by right and conquest. The wounded man in her cellar was not just any Apache, he was connected to her greatest enemy. Her act of mercy now had a name, and that name was a declaration of war. Dawn broke in streaks of pale pink and gray, but it was not the light that woke Abby. It was a sound, or rather, the absence of it. The familiar morning chorus of birds was silent. A deep, unnatural quiet had fallen over her small piece of the world. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She crept to the window, her old rifle in her hand, and peered through a crack in the wooden shutter. Her blood ran cold. They were there. A silent circle of riders, their forms like statues against the rising sun, an Apache war party. They surrounded her ranch, their horses standing patient and still. There were at least a dozen of them, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on her cabin. They made no move, no sound. They did not need to. Their very presence was a question, an accusation. Leading them was an older warrior, his face a mask of weathered lines, his eyes holding the keen, predatory focus of an eagle. This had to be Nakos, a war chief whose name was spoken in whispers by settlers and soldiers alike. He was the wounded man's uncle, she now realized, with a fresh wave of terror. Abby's knuckles were white where she gripped the worn stock of her rifle. Her father had left it to her, a tool for survival, but against so many, it was a useless token. She could bolt the door, fire a few rounds, and die in a blaze of futile defiance. Or she could face them. She knew they were not here for a fight, not yet. They were here for their own. Her single act of compassion had brought not just danger to her door, but an ancient law, a code of blood and honor that she could not possibly comprehend. She was trapped, a lone woman caught between the gears of a conflict far older than her small ranch. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Each passing second felt like an hour. The warriors waited with a patience born from the land itself, a patience that unnerved her more than any war cry. They knew he was inside. They would not leave without him. The choice was hers to make, but it was no choice at all. She had to walk out there. She had to face the consequences of the life she had chosen to save. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Abby unbolted the door and stepped onto the porch. The morning air was cool, but she felt a sheen of sweat on her skin. She held the rifle loosely, its barrel pointed toward the wooden planks of the porch floor. Her eyes met the gaze of the war chief, Nakos. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. "He is alive," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I removed the arrow. He has lost much blood, but his spirit is strong. He will live." She offered the truth as her only defense. Nakos studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to strip away every layer of her fear, searching for the core of her intent. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He believed her. A sliver of tension eased in Abby's chest. But before any more could be said, the sound of a lone horse approaching at a canter broke the fragile peace. A rider emerged from the trail leading to town. It was Deputy Miller, a young man with honest, weary eyes, his badge a small tin star on his dusty vest. He looked torn between his duty and his conscience. Miller pulled his horse to a halt, his gaze shifting nervously between Abby and the silent warriors. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Abby," he began, his voice strained. "Sheriff Kane knows. Someone saw you near the canyon. He has gathered a posse." The deputy's eyes pleaded with her. "He says you are harboring one of the savages. He is on his way now. He gives you 5 minutes to hand the man over. He says if you do not, he will burn you out." The words hung in the air, an ultimatum that left no room for negotiation. The world seemed to spin around Abby Kane. The name was a curse. She looked at Nakos, whose face had hardened at the mention of the posse. Then she looked at the earnest, terrified face of Deputy Miller. She was standing on a precipice, with two worlds colliding right on her doorstep. 5 minutes. It was not a reprieve. It was a countdown to violence. She had tried to do a good thing, a simple human thing. And now, that act was about to ignite a war, with her and her small ranch at the very center of the inferno. The 5 minutes evaporated like mist in the sun. A cloud of dust on the horizon announced their arrival. Silas Cain and his posse, a dozen men armed with rifles and a self-righteous fury, thundered toward the ranch. Cain rode at their head, his face a mask of pure rage, his eyes burning with a hateful fire. He reined in his horse so hard it reared back, its hooves pawing at the air. "Traitor!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with venom as he pointed a finger at Abby. The words struck her harder than a bullet. "You hide a heathen in your home." Cain's voice dripped with years of bitterness. "That savage is from the same tribe that murdered my brother 10 years ago. They are all the same. Bring him out, woman, or by God, we will burn this shack to the ground with you inside it." His pain was a weapon, and he wielded it without care. Abby looked from Cain's twisted face to the stoic calm of Nakos. She was caught between a man's vengeful grief and a people's quiet dignity. The choice was not a choice at all. "He was wounded when I found him," Abby shouted back, her own anger rising to meet his. "And your brother Cain was no saint. He was a rustler and a bully. This is your war, fueled by your own hate. It has nothing to do with me." With those words, she drew her line in the dust. She had chosen her side. A murmur went through Cain's men. In their eyes, she was no longer one of them. She was an outcast, a sympathizer, a target. Cain's face contorted into a snarl. "You have made your choice, then," he spat. He raised his rifle, not at the Apache warriors who sat like stone statues, but directly at her. So be it. The air grew thick, the moment stretching into an eternity. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the tableau of impending violence. Abby stood her ground, her heart a wild drum in her chest. She had offered mercy to a stranger, and in return, the world was offering her only fire and death. "Fire!" Cain's command shattered the stillness. The first volley of shots was not aimed at the warriors, but at Abby's cabin. Bullets chewed into the weathered wood of her home, splintering the doorframe and shattering a window pane. It was a declaration. Her sanctuary was no longer safe. In the blink of an eye, the Apache warriors melted away from their positions, disappearing into the rocks and gullies surrounding the ranch, with a speed and silence that was both terrifying and beautiful. They had become part of the land itself. Abby dove for the cover of the porch corner as another shot sang past her head. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. From the rocks, the sharp crack of Apache rifles answered Cain's posse. The fight had begun. Abby raised her own rifle, her fear replaced by a cold, clear focus. She did not aim to kill. She aimed to drive them back, to make them see the foolishness of this fight. She fired at the ground near the feet of one of Cain's men, sending him scrambling for cover. She caught a glimpse of Deputy Miller near the back of the posse. He raised his rifle, but she saw him deliberately aim high, his shot wasted on the empty blue sky. His face was pale, his expression one of agony. He was a man caught in a battle against his own soul. The fight was short and brutal. Nakos's warriors were masters of this terrain. They fired with deadly accuracy, their positions constantly shifting. One of Cain's men cried out, clutching a bleeding arm. Another's horse bolted, leaving him exposed. Panic began to ripple through the posse. This was not the easy fight Cain had promised them. They were facing disciplined warriors, not disorganized raiders. Cursing, Cain tried to rally his men, but their courage had broken. One by one, they turned and fled back toward the perceived safety of Red Creek. The silence that descended in their wake was deafening, broken only by the whimpering of a wounded man and the heavy breathing of those who remained. The first battle was over, but Abby knew the war had just begun. In the tense quiet that followed the retreat, Abby hurried back to the cellar. She found Cale, the young Apache, awake and struggling to sit up. His eyes were clear, and the feverish haze had lifted. He looked at her, and in his gaze she saw not just gratitude, but a profound understanding of the sacrifice she had made. "They came for you," she said, her voice soft. "Your people." He nodded slowly. And he came for you, Kale replied, his voice still weak. The man with hate in his eyes. He told her his story then, in quiet, halting sentences. He and his brother were not warriors on a raid. They had been transporting rare medicinal herbs from the high mountains to an elderly shaman in a neighboring clan. It was a mission of peace. But they were ambushed by Cain's men. His brother had fallen in the first volley. Kale had been wounded but managed to escape, riding until his horse collapsed and he could go no further. His words painted a picture not of savagery, but of a brutal, unprovoked attack. When Abby emerged from the cabin, Nakos was waiting. The old war chief's face was grim. He wordlessly offered her a water skin. It was a gesture of respect, an acknowledgement that she had bled with them. They will return, Nakos said, his voice low and certain. Cain will not accept this shame. He will bring more men. We cannot stay here. Your home is no longer a shelter. It is a target. His words confirmed the cold dread in her own heart. The life she had known here was over. We must leave, Nakos continued, his eyes scanning the horizon. There is a place, a day's ride from here. A canyon the white men call Coyote's Maw. It is a natural fortress. There we can make our stand. The plan was simple, desperate, and their only hope. Abby looked at the bullet scars on her cabin walls, the shattered window, the churned-up dirt of her yard. This small piece of earth was all she had. But it was just wood and dust. Her life, and the lives of those she now stood with, was what mattered. She nodded. I will go with you. They left, under the cloak of darkness, moving like specters through the moonlit landscape. Abby rode a horse provided by the warriors, her own mare having been spooked during the fight. Kale rode beside her, supported by 2 other warriors, his posture straighter now, his strength slowly returning. The Apache moved with an economy of motion she had never witnessed. There were no wasted words, no unnecessary sounds. They were a single, silent organism flowing over the land, their path known only to their leader, Nakos. The silence between Abby and Kale was not empty. It was filled with a growing connection, a bond forged in shared danger and mutual respect. She was no longer just a white woman to him. She was the brave soul who had risked everything. And he was no longer a faceless savage to her. He was a man of quiet dignity and strength, fighting for justice for his slain brother. The harsh lines of their separate worlds were beginning to blur in the pale moonlight. They stopped for a brief rest in a hidden alcove, shielded from the open plains. The air was cold, and the stars were a brilliant, indifferent canopy above them. Kale reached into a small pouch at his belt and pulled out a small carved object. He pressed it into her hand. It was an amulet, carved from the bone of an eagle, smooth and cool to the touch. For protection, he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. You saved my life. Now, it is my duty to protect yours. His fingers brushed against hers as he gave her the amulet. The brief touch sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the cold night air. It was a spark of intimacy in a world of violence and hardship. She looked from the amulet in her palm to his dark, serious eyes. In that moment, she realized with a jolt that her heart, which she had guarded so fiercely for so long, was no longer entirely her own. It had found a new anchor in the most unlikely of places. They reached Coyote's Maw as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky. It was a narrow, winding canyon with high, defensible walls. But they had no time to rest. A scout returned with dire news. Cain's posse, now larger and reinforced with more men from Red Creek, was closing in fast. The battle they had tried to avoid was now inevitable. Nakos, calm and resolute, began to position his warriors along the canyon's upper ridges, turning the natural fortress into a well-laid trap. When Cain's men thundered into the canyon, they were met with a deadly crossfire. Arrows and bullets rained down from the cliffs above. The posse, caught in the narrow passage, fell into chaos. Abby took her position beside Cale, who, despite his wound, held a rifle with a steady hand. She fired with a cold precision, her mind focused only on survival. This was no longer about abstract ideas of right and wrong. It was about protecting the people who had taken her in, protecting the man beside her. In the swirling dust and confusion of the fight, she saw a terrible drama unfold. Deputy Miller, his face a mask of conflict, found himself face to face with a young Apache warrior. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other. Then, Miller lowered his revolver. He could not shoot. Silas Kane, seeing this act of mercy from a nearby ridge, let out a roar of fury. He raised his own rifle and, without hesitation, shot his own deputy in the back. The betrayal was absolute, a final descent into madness. The sight of Miller falling broke something inside Cale. With a cry of rage, he launched himself from their cover and charged toward Kane. It was not a calculated move, but an act of pure, righteous fury. The two men met in a brutal clash of desperation and vengeance. It was a short, violent struggle. Cale, fueled by grief and a warrior's training, overpowered the saloon owner. He shattered Kane's rifle over a rock and left him broken and defeated in the dust, his reign of terror finally over. With Kane defeated and their ranks broken, the last of the posse fled in a desperate, disorganized rout. A profound silence fell over Coyote's maw, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Deputy Miller was alive, his wound serious but not fatal. Nakos looked down at the fallen lawman, his expression thoughtful. "He chose his path," the old chief said. "He has honor. We will not leave him to the buzzards. We will take him with us." It was a gesture of mercy that Kane himself would never have offered. Their losses had been few, their victory decisive. As the warriors tended to their own, Nakos approached Abby. He stood before her, not as a chief to an outsider, but as an equal. "You fought like one of the people," he said, the highest praise he could give. "Your place is no longer in the white man's world. That ranch is gone, but you have a place with us if you will take it." He was offering her not just refuge, but a home, a family. Cale came to stand beside them, his hand finding hers. His touch was firm, reassuring. "My mountains will be your home, Abigail," he said, his voice full of a quiet promise. He used her full name, a sign of deep respect. "Where we are going, the hatred of men like Cain cannot reach. There is peace there, a new life." She looked into his eyes, dark and deep as the night sky, and she saw her future reflected there. It was a future of hardship, yes, but also of love and belonging. She nodded, a single, decisive movement. Her past was ashes. As she mounted her horse, ready to ride east with them into the hidden Apache strongholds, Abby Thorne took one last look back at the world she was leaving behind. There was no regret, only a fierce, quiet resolve. She had fought for a life worth living, and in the dust and blood of the unforgiving Arizona territory, she had found it. The trail ahead was unknown, but she would not walk it alone. Her heart was, at last, truly free.